What happens when a wedding meant to secure a future turns into a public collapse in a single minute? How did one sentence from the bride's mother cost her daughter everything she thought was guaranteed? They believed I would stay quiet and pay. Instead, I stood up, spoke to my son, and ended the wedding in front of everyone. My name is Zane Braskin, and I'm 52 years old. I own a small but successful construction company in suburban Denver, Colorado. I've built my reputation on keeping my word, paying my bills on time, and treating people with respect. I expected the same in return, especially from family. That expectation nearly cost my son everything. The first red flag appeared 6 months before the wedding, at what Liora Torren called a casual family dinner at Romano's, an upscale Italian restaurant downtown. Nothing about Liora Torren was ever casual. She was 54, perfectly manicured, and had the kind of confidence that came from never being told no. Her daughter Liora was marrying my son Selias, and according to Kina, this dinner was about getting to know each other better. I arrived 15 minutes early, as I always do. Selias was already there, looking uncomfortable in a button-down shirt that was too formal for a casual dinner. He's 27, works as an accountant, and has inherited my tendency to overthink social situations. He stood when he saw me. "Dad, thanks for coming," he said, shaking my hand with the kind of firmness that suggested he needed the reassurance. "Wouldn't miss it," I replied, though something in his expression made me wonder if that was true. Liora arrived next, 26 and beautiful in the way that required significant daily maintenance. She was a lifestyle blogger with 30,000 Instagram followers and an income that fluctuated wildly based on brand partnerships that came and went. She kissed Selias on the cheek and smiled at me with the practiced warmth of someone who made their living being likable online. "Mr. Braskin, so good to see you again," she said. "Mom's really excited about tonight." That should have been warning sign number 2. When someone tells you how excited their mother is, it usually means you're about to be asked for something. Kina arrived last, making an entrance that turned heads at 3 nearby tables. She wore a black dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent and carried herself like she owned the restaurant. She didn't apologize for being late. "Zane," she said, extending her hand like I should be honored to shake it. "Thank you for accommodating my schedule." I hadn't been aware that I was accommodating anything. The dinner had been scheduled for 7:30, and it was now 7:45. But I shook her hand and said, "Of course." We sat down, and Kina immediately took control of the conversation. She ordered wine for the table without asking what anyone preferred, then launched into what sounded like a prepared speech about how wonderful it was that our children had found each other. "Liora deserves security," she said, looking directly at me. "She's been through so much with her career, all the uncertainty. It's time for her to have stability." "Selias is very stable," I agreed, wondering why this felt like a job interview. "Oh, I'm sure he is," Kina said, waving her hand dismissively. "But you know how young people are with money. It's really the family that provides the foundation." Liora shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Selias was studying his menu like it contained the secrets of the universe. "I think Selias manages his finances very well," I said carefully. Of course, Kina said. "But weddings are expensive, and young couples today need so much help getting started. The down payment on a house, furniture, all of it. It's really an investment in their future." And there it was. The ask hadn't been made directly, but it hung in the air like smoke. I was expected to pay for things, not asked, expected. "I'm sure they'll figure it out," I said. Kina's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Well, of course they will, with family support." The conversation continued for another hour, but the subtext never changed. Kina spoke about the wedding like it was a business transaction, with Liora as the product and my family as the purchaser. Every reference to love or happiness was followed immediately by a discussion of costs or needs. When the check came, I reached for it automatically. Kina didn't even pretend to object. "Thank you, Zane," she said. "I'm sure this is the first of many family celebrations you'll be hosting." After dinner, Selias walked me to my car. The parking garage was quiet, and for the first time all evening, he looked like he could speak freely. "Dad, I'm sorry about that," he said. "I know she comes on strong." "She certainly does," I said. "How long has she been planning your financial future?" Selias looked down at his shoes. "It's not like that. She just wants what's best for Liora." "And what does Liora want?" "She wants her mom to be happy," he said quietly. That was the moment I realized my son was in trouble. Not the kind of trouble you can fix with money, but the kind that money makes worse. "Selias," I said, "are you happy?" He looked up at me with the same expression he'd had as a kid when he'd broken something and was trying to figure out how to tell me. "I love her, Dad," he said. "That's not what I asked." He didn't answer, which was an answer itself. I drove home that night thinking about patterns. In construction, you learn to recognize them early. A small crack in a foundation doesn't stay small. A contractor who's late on the first day will be late every day. A client who questions every bill will never be satisfied with any price. Liora Torren had shown me her pattern in one dinner. She expected to be accommodated. She expected to be paid for, and she expected never to be told no. The question was, what was I going to do about it? Over the next 2 months, the pattern became impossible to ignore. It started with small things. Liora mentioning that her car needed repairs, Kina suggesting that Selias could probably help with that. Then bigger things. Liora's credit cards were maxed out from wedding planning. Surely that was temporary. Then the wedding itself. Wouldn't it be wonderful if the father of the groom could contribute to making his son's special day perfect? Each request came through Liora, delivered with apologetic smiles and promises that it was just this once, just until she got back on her feet, just until the brand partnerships picked up again. And each time, Selias said yes. I found this out during one of our monthly dinners, just the two of us at Murphy's Diner on Colfax. It's the kind of place where the coffee is strong, the portions are large, and you can have a conversation without someone at the next table live streaming it. "How are the wedding plans coming?" I asked, cutting into my meatloaf. "Good," Selias said, but he was pushing his food around his plate instead of eating it. "Expensive, but good." "Everything okay financially?" He set down his fork and looked out the window. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "When you and Mom were planning your wedding, did she have debt?" My wife Naya had passed away 3 years earlier, and Selias rarely mentioned her in casual conversation. When he did, it was usually because something was weighing on him deeply. "No," I said. "We were both pretty careful with money." "Why?" "Liora has some credit card debt, not a lot," he added quickly. "Just from getting her blog started, buying equipment, that kind of thing. I've been helping her pay it down." "How much debt?" "About $12,000. I kept my expression neutral, but $12,000 was more than Selias made in 3 months after taxes. "That's quite a bit." "It's temporary," he said, echoing what I was sure Liora had told him. "Once we're married and she doesn't have to worry about rent, she can focus on growing her following." "What about her mother? Can she help?" Selias laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Kina says it's important for couples to solve their own problems. She thinks it's good for our relationship." "But she doesn't think it's good for couples to pay for their own wedding?" "That's different," Selias said. "That's family tradition." I took a sip of coffee and chose my words carefully. "Son, what happens if the debt doesn't go away after the wedding?" "It will," he said, with the kind of certainty that comes from hope, not evidence. "But what if it doesn't?" He was quiet for a long moment. "Then I guess we'll figure it out." That phrase, "we'll figure it out," was Selias's way of saying, "I'll handle it alone." He'd been saying it since he was 12 years old and his bike got stolen. He'd rather solve problems himself than ask for help, which made him an easy target for people who specialized in creating problems. "Selias," I said, "you know you can talk to me about anything, right?" "I know, Dad, but this is something I need to handle myself." After dinner, I sat in my car for 10 minutes before starting the engine. I thought about calling Liora directly, but that would put Selias in an impossible position. I thought about calling Kina, but that felt like walking into a trap. Instead, I drove home and did what I always do when I need to think clearly. I went to my workshop. I have a woodworking setup in my garage. Nothing fancy, but it's where I go when I need to work through problems. There's something about the rhythm of sanding that helps my mind organize itself. That night, I was refinishing a coffee table that had belonged to Naya's grandmother, and as I worked, I thought about debt. In my business, I've learned that debt changes relationships. When someone owes you money, they start avoiding you. When you owe someone money, you start resenting them. Either way, the relationship becomes about the debt instead of about the people. Selias was taking on debt to solve Liora's problems, but the debt wasn't going away, it was just changing hands. And as long as Kina was in the picture, encouraging Liora to see Selias as a solution to her financial problems, the debt would keep growing. The next morning, I called my lawyer, not because I was planning anything dramatic, but because I wanted to understand my options. Tom Mitchell had been handling my business contracts for 15 years, and he was the kind of lawyer who gave you straight answers instead of billable hours. "Tom," I said when he picked up the phone, "hypothetical question. If someone is paying for a wedding, what kind of legal obligations does that create?" "Depends on how it's structured," he said. "Are we talking about a gift or a loan?" "Let's say it hasn't been specified." "Then it's probably a gift in the eyes of the law unless there's a written agreement saying otherwise." "Why?" "Just trying to understand how these things work." "Zane," Tom said, and I could hear him leaning back in his chair. "In my experience, family money problems don't get solved by lawyers. They get solved by families having honest conversations." "What if the family doesn't want to have honest conversations?" "Then the money problems become relationship problems, and relationship problems are a lot more expensive than money problems." I thanked Tom and hung up, but his words stayed with me. Kina and Liora weren't interested in honest conversations. They were interested in quiet solutions that didn't require them to change their behavior. And Selias was so eager to keep everyone happy that he was willing to bankrupt himself to avoid conflict. But I wasn't Selias. I'd built my business by being direct about expectations and consequences. If someone wanted to play games with my family's financial future, they were going to discover that I knew how to play games too. The question was, how long should I wait before I started playing back? The answer came 3 weeks later, at the venue tasting. Liora had chosen the Grandview Event Center, a converted mansion in Cherry Creek that charged premium prices for premium ambiance. The tasting was supposed to be for the immediate family only, a chance to sample the menu and finalize the details. Kina turned it into a performance. She arrived with a notebook, a measuring tape, and opinions about everything from the thread count of the napkins to the angle of the lighting. She treated the staff like servants and me like a walking checkbook. But it was what she said about Selias that crossed the line. We were sampling the appetizers when the conversation turned to the seating arrangement. Liora wanted a sweetheart table for just her and Selias, but Kina thought they should sit with the wedding party. "Liora needs to be visible," Kina said, adjusting the sample place setting like she was staging a photo shoot. "This is her day to shine." "It's their day," I corrected gently. Kina looked at me like I'd said something charmingly naive. "Oh, Zane, you know how these things work. The bride is the star. The groom is just there to look handsome and sign the papers." Selias was standing right next to her when she said it. I think Selias brings a little more to the relationship than that, I said. Of course he does, Kina said, waving her hand dismissively. He brings stability, security, a future. That's exactly what Liora needs. What does Selias need? I asked. The question seemed to genuinely confuse her. What do you mean? I mean, what does Liora bring to the relationship? What does Selias get out of this marriage? Kina's smile became sharp. He gets to marry a beautiful, successful woman who could have chosen anyone. He should be grateful. The room went quiet. Even the catering staff, who had been bustling around setting up the next course, seemed to freeze. Selias's face went red, but he didn't say anything. Liora looked mortified, but didn't contradict her mother. And I realized that this wasn't the first time Kina had said something like this. This was her standard operating procedure. I see, I said quietly. I'm sure you do, Kina said, apparently taking my response as agreement. Young men today are so lucky when they find women who know what they want. After the tasting, I walked Selias to his car again. This was becoming our routine. Public events followed by private conversations in parking lots. Dad, he started, but I held up my hand. Let me ask you something, I said. Do you think you're lucky to be marrying Liora? Of course I do. Do you think she's lucky to be marrying you? He hesitated. I hope so. That's not the same thing. Dad, Kina just talks like that. She doesn't mean anything by it. Son, in my experience, people always mean something by it. The question is whether you're going to let them get away with it. Selias looked down at his keys. What am I supposed to do? Call off the wedding because her mother has a big mouth? I'm not suggesting you call off anything, I said. I'm suggesting you start paying attention to patterns. What patterns? The pattern where you pay for things and get treated like you should be grateful for the privilege. The pattern where your feelings don't matter as much as everyone else's comfort. The pattern where you're expected to solve problems you didn't create. It's not like that, isn't it? When's the last time Liora paid for dinner when you went out? She's trying to pay down her debt. When's the last time she thanked you for helping with that debt? Selias didn't answer. When's the last time her mother treated you like someone she respected instead of someone she was doing a favor by tolerating? Dad, please. I love her. I know you do, I said, but love isn't supposed to be a one-way transaction. That night, I made a decision. I wasn't going to confront Kina directly. That would only put Selias in the middle and give her a chance to play the victim. I wasn't going to refuse to pay for the wedding. That would hurt Selias more than anyone else. Instead, I was going to start documenting everything. Every request for money, every dismissive comment, every time my son was treated like he was lucky to be tolerated instead of valued for who he was. I started a file on my computer. Nothing dramatic, just a simple record of dates, amounts, and conversations. If this situation was going to blow up, I wanted to make sure I had the facts straight. The first entry was simple. March 15th, venue tasting. Liora Torren stated that Selias should be grateful to marry Liora, described his role as looking handsome and signing papers. Selias did not respond. Liora did not correct her mother. I had a feeling the file was going to get a lot longer before this was over. 2 weeks after the venue tasting, Liora called me directly for the first time. Not through Selias, not through casual mentions during family dinners, but a direct phone call to my office at 8 in the morning. Mr. Braskin, she said, and I could hear the practiced sweetness that she used in her Instagram videos. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. Not at all, I said, though I was immediately suspicious. In my experience, when someone starts a conversation by hoping they're not catching you at a bad time, they're about to make your time significantly worse. I wanted to talk to you about something kind of sensitive, she said. It's about Selias. What about him? Well, you know how generous he's been. helping me with my expenses while I get my business off the ground. I'm so grateful for everything he's done. I waited for her to get to the point. The thing is, she continued, I found out yesterday that he's been putting everything on his credit cards. The wedding expenses, my car repair, all of it. I had no idea he was going into debt. This was interesting. Either Liora was genuinely concerned about my son's financial situation, or she was setting up another ask. Given the family pattern, I suspected the latter. How much debt are we talking about? I asked. Almost $20,000, she said, and I could hear her voice crack a little. Mr. Braskin, I feel terrible. I never would have let him do this if I'd known. $20,000. In 6 months, my son had accumulated $20,000 in debt, and he hadn't said a word to me about it. What do you think we should do about it? I asked. Well, she said, and there was the pause I'd been waiting for. Mom thought maybe we could restructure some of the wedding expenses. Instead of Selias putting everything on credit cards, maybe there could be more of a family contribution. A family contribution. From your side, she clarified, since Mom's already contributed so much to the planning and coordination. I leaned back in my office chair and looked out the window. My construction crew was loading equipment for a job in Lakewood, and I watched them work while I processed what Liora was really saying. Kina had contributed planning and coordination, things that cost time but no money. Selias had contributed $20,000 in actual cash, putting himself into debt that would take years to pay off. And now I was being asked to contribute even more actual money to fix the problem that their spending had created. Liora, I said, can I ask you something? Of course. What's your plan for paying off Selias's debt after the wedding? Well, once we're married, we'll be sharing expenses, so there will be more money available to pay things down. But your income is still variable, right? Based on brand partnerships? Yes, but I'm working on growing my following. And once I'm married, I'll have more content opportunities. Married lifestyle, home decorating, that kind of thing. In other words, she was planning to monetize her marriage to my son, and if that didn't work, well, they'd figure it out, which meant Selias would figure it out. I see, I said. And what does Selias think about this plan? He doesn't know I'm calling you, she admitted. I wanted to talk to you first, see if there was a way to help him without making him feel bad about it. This was actually brilliant, in a manipulative way. By framing the conversation as concern for Selias's feelings, Liora was making it difficult for me to refuse, without seeming like I didn't care about my own son. And by calling me directly, she was putting me in the position of either solving the problem quietly or telling Selias that his fiancée was going behind his back to ask for money. Liora, I said, I appreciate you bringing this to my attention. Let me think about it and get back to you. Of course, she said. And Mr. Braskin? Thank you for being so understanding. I know how much Selias values your opinion. After she hung up, I sat in my office for a long time thinking about chess. I'd taught Selias to play when he was 8 years old, and the first lesson I'd given him was about seeing the whole board, not just the piece that was currently under attack. Kina and Liora were playing chess, but they thought I was playing checkers. They thought I would see the immediate problem, Selias's debt, and respond with the immediate solution, my money. They thought I would focus on the piece under attack and miss the larger strategy. But I could see the whole board. And what I saw was a pattern designed to make my son financially dependent on people who didn't respect him. The debt wasn't an accident or a temporary setback. It was a feature, not a bug. As long as Selias was in debt, he couldn't afford to leave. As long as he couldn't afford to leave, he would keep solving problems he didn't create. I opened the file on my computer and added a new entry. March 29th. Liora called directly to discuss Selias's $20,000 debt. Requested family contribution to wedding expenses. Claims to be unaware of debt accumulation, but has specific plan for restructuring payments. Did not inform Selias of call. Then I picked up the phone and called Tom Mitchell again. "Tom," I said when he answered, "that hypothetical situation we discussed? It's not hypothetical anymore. What do you need to know?" If someone is paying for wedding expenses and those expenses are being charged to credit cards in someone else's name, who's legally responsible for the debt? "The person whose name is on the cards," Tom said immediately. "Why? And if a third party pays off those cards, is that considered a gift or a loan?" "Depends on the documentation. Without a written agreement, it's probably a gift." "Zane, what's going on?" I told him about the debt, the phone call, and the pattern I was seeing. Tom listened without interrupting, which was one of the things I liked about him. "Here's my advice," he said when I finished. "Don't pay anything without a written agreement. And don't make any agreements until you're sure you understand what you're really agreeing to." "What do you mean?" "I mean, this sounds less like a family helping with wedding expenses and more like a family creating a financial dependency. If you pay off your son's debt now, what happens when there's more debt next month?" "There will be more debt next month." "Exactly. So the question isn't whether you can afford to help your son. The question is whether helping him now will make things better or worse in the long run." After I hung up, I made another decision. I wasn't going to pay off Selias's debt, and I wasn't going to increase my contribution to the wedding expenses. But I also wasn't going to tell Liora no directly. Instead, I was going to let her think I was considering it. I was going to let the debt continue to grow. And I was going to wait for the perfect moment to show my son exactly what kind of family he was marrying into. Sometimes the best way to win at chess is to let your opponent think they're winning until it's too late for them to change their strategy. The morning of the wedding, I woke up at 5 a.m. with the kind of clarity that comes from months of preparation finally reaching their conclusion. I'd been documenting, observing, and waiting for 4 months. Today, I would find out whether my patience had been worth it. The wedding was scheduled for 2 p.m. at the Grandview Event Center, with the reception immediately following. I had a room at the nearby Marriott, not because I lived too far away to drive home, but because I wanted to be able to leave whenever I chose to, without worrying about logistics. I put on my best suit, navy blue, tailored, the kind that made it clear I had money without being flashy about it. Then I checked my phone one last time for the messages I'd been expecting. The first was from the florist, confirming that the final payment was due upon delivery. The second was from the caterer with the same message. The third was from the photographer, the DJ, and the venue coordinator. All of them had the same instructions, final payment due on delivery, and all payments were expected from either Zane Braskin or Zane Braskin. None of the vendors had Liora's or Kina's names on their contracts. I'd known this for weeks, of course. I'd quietly confirmed it with each vendor, not to cause problems, but to understand exactly where the legal and financial responsibility lay. And it lay entirely with my family. At 10 a.m., I drove to the venue. The parking lot was already busy with vendor trucks and early arriving guests. I found the coordinator, a efficient woman named Patricia, who had been dealing with Kina's demands for months. "Mr. Braskin," she said when she saw me, "thank you for coming early. I wanted to confirm the final payment schedule with you." "Of course," I said. "What's the total amount due today?" She handed me an invoice. $43,000. Flowers, catering, photography, music, venue fees, and a dozen smaller expenses that had been added over the past month. "And this is all due before the ceremony begins?" I asked. "That's correct. It's standard policy for events of this size." I folded the invoice and put it in my jacket pocket. "I'll take care of it." "Thank you," she said, looking relieved. "I have to say, this is one of our larger weddings this year. Your son is very lucky." "Yes," I said. "He is." At 11 a.m., I went to the hotel bar and ordered a cup of coffee. The bar was quiet, with just a few business travelers checking their phones and a couple of early wedding guests who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. I sat in a corner booth and reviewed my plan one more time. It was simple, really. I was going to attend the ceremony, listen to the vows, and wait for the reception toasts. If Kina could get through the entire day without publicly disrespecting my son, I would pay the bills and let the marriage proceed. If she couldn't, well, then I would give Selias a choice. At noon, I got a text from Selias. "Dad, are you here? I could use some moral support." I finished my coffee and walked over to the venue. The groom's preparation room was on the second floor, a small but elegant space with a view of the gardens. Selias was there with his best man, Jace, trying to tie his bow tie and failing. "Here," I said, walking over to him. "Let me help." I tied his bow tie the same way I'd tied my own on my wedding day, 28 years earlier. Selias stood still and let me work, but I could feel the tension in his shoulders. "You okay?" I asked. "Just nervous," he said. "Normal wedding day nerves, I guess." "Any second thoughts?" He looked at me in the mirror. "Dad, are you trying to talk me out of getting married?" "I'm trying to make sure you're getting married for the right reasons." "I love her," he said, but there was a question in his voice. "I know you do, but love isn't always enough." "What do you mean?" I finished with his bow tie and put my hands on his shoulders. "I mean that marriage is a partnership. Both people have to contribute. Both people have to respect each other. Both people have to want the other person to be happy. Liora wants me to be happy. Does she? Or does she want you to make her happy?" Selias didn't answer, which was becoming a pattern in our conversations. "Son," I said, "I want you to know something. Whatever happens today, whatever you decide, I'm proud of you, and I'll support whatever choice you make." "What do you mean, whatever happens today?" "I mean weddings have a way of showing people who they really are," I said. "Just keep your eyes open." At 1:30, the guests began taking their seats. I sat in the front row on the groom's side, next to my sister Carol and her husband Mike. Behind us were Selias's friends from college, his co-workers, and a few neighbors who had watched him grow up. On the bride's side, the crowd was different. Liora's blogger friends, all perfectly dressed and constantly checking their phones for the best angles. Kina's social circle, women who looked like they spent their mornings at the country club and their afternoons at the spa. And in the front row, Kina herself, wearing a dress that was almost white and a smile that looked like it had been professionally installed. The ceremony began at 2 p.m. sharp. Selias walked down the aisle with the officiant, looking handsome and nervous. The wedding party followed. Bridesmaids in dusty rose, groomsmen in navy blue. Everything was perfect, exactly as Kina had planned it. Then Liora appeared at the back of the room, and I had to admit she looked beautiful. Her dress was elegant, without being ostentatious. Her makeup was flawless, and she walked down the aisle like she was floating. But as she passed the front row, I saw her glance at her mother, looking for approval. Kina nodded once, a small gesture that said, "You're doing fine." And I realized that even on her wedding day, Liora was performing for her mother's approval. The ceremony itself was traditional, vows about love and honor and cherishing each other forever, rings exchanged with hands that trembled slightly, a kiss that brought applause from the crowd, and then it was over, and they were married, and everyone moved to the ballroom for the reception. That's where everything fell apart. The reception started exactly as Kina had planned it. Cocktails and appetizers while the photographer captured candid moments that were anything but spontaneous. A receiving line where guests congratulated the happy couple and complimented the beautiful venue. Background music that was elegant but not intrusive. I stood near the bar, nursing a whiskey and watching the dynamics play out. Liora was in her element, posing for photos and accepting compliments on her dress. Selias was trying to keep up, smiling and shaking hands and playing the part of the grateful groom. And Kina was orchestrating it all, moving through the crowd like a conductor leading an orchestra. At 6 p.m., dinner was served. The food was excellent, beef tenderloin and salmon, exactly as we'd tasted it months earlier. The wine was flowing, conversations were getting louder, and the general mood was celebratory. That's when Kina decided to give her toast. She stood up without being announced, tapping her wine glass with her knife until the room fell quiet. She was slightly flushed from the wine, and her smile was sharper than it had been during the ceremony. "I want to say a few words about my daughter and her new husband," she began, and the room settled in for what everyone assumed would be a typical mother of the bride speech. "Liora has always been special," Kina continued. "Beautiful, intelligent, talented. She could have married anyone, literally anyone. I used to joke that we'd have to beat the suitors away with a stick." Polite laughter from the crowd. Selias smiled uncomfortably. "But Liora is also practical," Kina said, and her tone shifted slightly. "She knows that marriage isn't just about romance. It's about security. It's about finding someone who can provide the life you deserve." The laughter was getting more nervous now. This wasn't sounding like a traditional wedding toast. "Selias is a good man," Kina said, looking directly at my son. "Stable, reliable, responsible. He works hard, he pays his bills, and he doesn't cause drama." She paused for a sip of wine, and in that pause, I felt something change in the room. People were starting to realize that this wasn't going where they expected. "Some people might call that boring," Kina continued, "but I call it practical. Liora needs someone who will take care of her, someone who understands that her happiness is the most important thing in the relationship." Another pause, another sip. "And Selias," she said, raising her glass toward him. "Well, Selias is just grateful to be here. Aren't you, honey? Grateful that a woman like Liora would choose a man like you?" The room went completely silent. Selias's face went white, then red. Liora looked mortified but didn't say anything, and I felt something inside me snap into place, like a lock clicking shut. "I mean, let's be honest," Kina continued, apparently oblivious to the horror on everyone's faces. "What did Selias really bring to this relationship besides a steady paycheck and good credit? Liora could have had anyone. A doctor, a lawyer, someone with real money. But she chose stability over excitement, security over passion." She raised her glass higher. "So here's to Selias, for knowing his place. And here's to Liora, for making the smart choice. Sometimes love isn't about grand gestures and fairy tales. Sometimes it's about finding someone who will pay the bills and stay out of your way." She drank, apparently expecting others to join her toast. No one did. The silence stretched for 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 30. Guests looked at each other in shock. The photographer had stopped taking pictures. Even the catering staff had frozen in place. And that's when I stood up. "Excuse me," I said, my voice cutting through the silence like a knife. "I'd like to say something." All eyes turned to me. Kina looked pleased, probably assuming I was going to smooth over her disastrous toast with some diplomatic words about family and love. She was wrong. "Selias," I said, looking directly at my son, "I want you to listen to me very carefully." He nodded, still looking shell-shocked. "You are not grateful to be here. You are not lucky that Liora chose you. You are not someone who should stay out of anyone's way." My voice was calm, but it carried to every corner of the room. "You are a good man who works hard, treats people with respect, and deserves to be with someone who values those qualities. You deserve to be with someone who sees you as a partner, not a paycheck. You deserve to be with someone whose family treats you like family, not like hired help." Kina started to interrupt, but I held up my hand. "I'm not finished," I said, still looking at Selias. "Son, you have a choice to make right now. You can stay here and accept that this is how you'll be treated for the rest of your marriage. You can accept that your wife's family sees you as a convenience, not a person. You can accept that your feelings don't matter as long as everyone else is comfortable." The room was so quiet, I could hear the ice settling in people's drinks. "Or," I continued, "you can remember that you're worth more than that. You can remember that marriage is supposed to be a partnership between equals, and you can walk out of here with your dignity intact." Selias stared at me for a long moment. Then he looked at Liora, who was still sitting frozen in her chair. Then he looked at Kina, who was finally starting to realize that her toast had consequences. "Dad," he said quietly, "what about the money? The wedding, the deposits, all of it?" "What about it?" I said. "It's just money. Your self-respect is worth more than money." "But I signed contracts. I'm responsible for—" "No," I said, cutting him off. "You're not responsible for anything anymore. As of right now, you are free of all debts related to this wedding, all obligations to pay for things you didn't choose, and all expectations to be grateful for being disrespected." I reached into my jacket and pulled out the invoice Patricia had given me that morning. "This wedding cost $43,000, I said, holding up the paper. "I was prepared to pay it as a gift to you and Liora, but I'm not paying $43,000 to watch my son be humiliated." I tore the invoice in half. "So here's what's going to happen. You and I are going to walk out of here right now. We're going to go home, and tomorrow, we're going to start figuring out how to clean up this mess. And if anyone has a problem with that, they can take it up with my lawyer." The room erupted. Kina started shouting about contracts and responsibilities and how dare I ruin her daughter's wedding. Liora burst into tears. Several guests started talking at once, trying to figure out what was happening, but Selias stood up. He looked at Liora one more time, and I saw something in his face that I hadn't seen in months. Clarity. "I'm sorry," he said to her, his voice barely audible over the chaos. "I really did love you, but I can't do this anymore." Then he walked over to me, and together we headed for the door. Behind us, the carefully planned wedding reception collapsed into chaos. Guests were pulling out their phones, vendors were demanding to know who was going to pay them, and Kina was screaming at anyone who would listen that this was all a misunderstanding. But we didn't look back. In the parking lot, Selias stopped walking and turned to me. "Dad," he said, "what have we done?" "We've reminded everyone in that room that respect isn't negotiable," I said, "and we've given you a chance to find someone who actually deserves you." He was quiet for a moment, processing everything that had just happened. "The debt," he said finally. "I still owe $20,000. "No," I said, "you don't. I'm paying off your credit cards tomorrow morning. Consider it a wedding gift, not to the marriage that just ended, but to the life that's about to begin." "Dad, I can't let you—" "Yes, you can," I said firmly. "Because that's what family does. Real family. We take care of each other, we respect each other, and we don't keep score." As we got in our cars, I could hear the chaos continuing inside the venue. Raised voices, slamming doors, the sound of a celebration turning into a disaster. But for the first time in months, my son looked free. 3 days later, I got a call from Tom Mitchell. "Zane," he said, "I've been getting some interesting phone calls. Apparently there are some unpaid wedding vendors who want to know if you're planning to honor your son's contracts." "What did you tell them?" "I told them that all contracts were with Zane Braskin, and Zane Braskin is no longer getting married, so the contracts are void. I also mentioned that if anyone had a problem with that, they should take it up with the people who actually received the services. And apparently Liora Torren has been calling around trying to find a lawyer who will force you to pay for her daughter's wedding. She's not having much luck." "What about Liora?" "Haven't heard from her. Word is she's moved back in with her mother and deleted all her social media accounts." 6 months later, Selias started dating a teacher named Ayla, who thought his stability was attractive, not boring. She paid for her own dinners, thanked him when he did nice things for her, and had never once suggested that he should be grateful for her attention. At their engagement party 2 years later, Ayla's mother gave a toast about how lucky her daughter was to have found such a good man. And for the first time in years, when someone said my son was lucky, I actually agreed with them.